All right, let me clean this up for this video. Wow, looks like new. Well, I finally got a hold of one, the highly anticipated brand new Zero Breeze Mark III AC unit. I don't get to keep this. This is a prototype. They sent it to me to test out and play with, and after I'm done with my video, I'm supposed to send this to the next ambassador for them to do theirs. So you're probably gonna see this exact same unit with the exact same scratches and flaws on it in everybody else's videos. Today I'm here to answer a very basic question. If you already own the Zero Breeze Mark II, is it worth upgrading to the Mark III? Or if you don't already have a Zero Breeze AC unit, but you know you're going to buy one, should you wait for the Mark III to come out, or will the Mark II treat you just fine? Now, the Mark III isn't slated to be sold to the main public until I believe April or May. I think that's their target date, just in time for summer, but I'm glad that they're sending it right now to their ambassadors for us to test and review, because if you've been keeping an eye out on the developments of the Mark III and you go on YouTube, you'll find that the only videos that are out there about this are the ones that Zero Breeze themselves released, whether that's their promo video or their demo videos. Well, now that I have this in my possession, I can actually save you from all of the promo videos and give you an honest review about this thing and how well this thing functions. So here I have the two units, the Mark II on this side, the Mark III on this side. They've been kind of promoting that the Mark III is going to be the same size as the Mark II, but I don't really think that that's pretty accurate, because the Mark III is definitely bigger. I know that the battery at the bottom is thicker, so it's probably giving it that height. But as far as also the overall girth of the thing, you can tell that the Mark III is definitely bigger and taller. But form factor wise, it's more updated. It has a more futuristic kind of look. It's kind of given off this Star Wars Imperial Star Destroyer, Las Vegas Raiders Stadium kind of vibe to it, right? Like, that's kind of how it looks like. It just feels like this thing is going to shoot lasers at you. On the Mark III, you have this flap that you can move up and down that will allow you to guide the air whichever way you want it to go. On the Mark II, they don't have that. It just blows in one direction. The only thing that's on here is this little LED display that tells you what temperature this thing is running at. But I don't like the positioning of this, because they give you this tube to allow you to direct the air wherever you want it, but you basically put it over the front here, you put the bolts, and now you've covered it. This is this way so that you can keep this on the outside of your tent and then kind of just bring the tube to inside your tent. That's actually how I like to run it, because I don't want this taking up any space inside my sleeping area. On the Mark III, I don't see any kind of bolts or clips where something like this would go onto, and I'm hoping that there is a way to get that, to do that, because I want this, especially that it's bigger, to be outside of my sleeping area, and I want to be able to have a tube to come out and go into the tent. They didn't send me one of these for the Mark III, so I don't know how that's actually going to get attached, but hopefully when this thing comes out, that question will be answered, because that is a big thing for me, and it could be a deal breaker if they don't have something like that for this, because I love running it like this on the Mark II. Now on the Mark II, everything is pretty much laid out, all of your buttons, all of the functions, and you don't get a display that tells you everything you need to know. The only display you get is this little tiny one here that tells you what degree this unit is running at. Now to turn this thing on, you just press it, and then to change the power of how much is coming in and out, you just press the plus and minus over here, and then below that you have all of your modes. And then you also have a light where if you press that, you get this nice light around here. You also get this indicator light in the back. Right now it's blue to tell you this thing is running. When it's red, that means that it's on standby. Now in the Mark III, this whole area here is a total total game changer because you actually get a full display now, which will appear right here. Above that, you have all of your buttons, and they've been wildly simplified. I would wish that they would have put some labels to kind of help you remember what button does what, because I tend to forget, but it's not that hard to figure out. To turn this thing on, just hold that middle button down and that'll turn this thing on. You'll hear a chime, and right now it's on rocket mode, and if you want to switch modes, you just press the button again. That'll go to AC, then that goes to sleep mode, then that goes to your fan, and then it goes to humid control. So if you want to get rid of the humidity that's inside that area, that'll help you do that. Right now you're seeing H38, humidity level 38%. And then you have your care mode. Then you have your heat mode, which I'm really excited about because I can now use this also as a heating unit. And then right below here, you see this how much power. Right now it's at 4. The button next to that helps you kind of go toggle through 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to 1 again. And then these two buttons here help you determine what temperature you want to set it at. The setting is at 71, and we can drop that down. Now the button on the very left, that's your light. Just press it one time and you'll get this like green light. Press it again, you get like a brighter green light. Press it again and you get this bluish purple light that kind of strobes in and out like very nicely, so for that calming kind of light effect. And then to press it again, you get like a flashing green light, and then it goes back to off. Now one huge change that they made that I'm so glad Zero Breeze listened to, because a lot of us had the same complaint, is the way the battery attaches to the unit. They would give us this little dongle here, and this dongle, I'm sorry to say, is pretty bad. The way this thing kind of comes out, which is so difficult to get your fingers in there to kind of turn it. And I have really thin fingers and I already have a hard time trying to get this thing out. Like I'm having a hard time right now. Then if you lose this thing, there is no way for you to connect the battery to the unit now, and you're kind of SOL. Well, the new one, look at this. It's just a plug now. There's also your power input right here. So if you're not using a battery, you would just use an AC power for this AC unit. Then you just plug it directly into that like this, and you are pretty much good. Over here you have your release to release the battery from the unit itself. Just press this, slide this off, and this comes right out. Now maybe I'm just not used to it yet, but I had a little bit more trouble getting this to come out because I couldn't figure out which way it goes. Yeah, see, so, okay. No, it's not. Oh, backwards. Okay. So you can see the mechanism is much different. You have basically these rubber guides that guide it through the slots of the battery, and then this thing is what locks it in place, whereas this has a lock right here on the battery, and this one clicks in to this little slot here. But see, that just locks in like this, and then again from the back. So there you go. Now comparing batteries, major upgrades on the Mark III, and I am loving it like so much. First off, charge time. On the Mark II, this would take about 6 hours for this to be charged to full from empty, whereas the Mark III, this can now be charged to full from empty in 2.5 hours with 500 watts. Now another really awesome thing about the Mark III is that it has accessory-free connection, and what that basically means is you can connect more than one battery together without needing to bring any additional accessories. Like I know with the Mark II, when I first got this, they had sent me a bunch of these accessories so that I can join more than one battery together. They were like split dongles, and you guys already know how I feel about dongles, and if you forget it, then now you can't connect them. Well, with the Mark III, you don't have to worry about that. Just bring your batteries and you can connect them together without needing to bring any additional accessories. The Mark III battery also has 12 to 72 volt DC input voltage, which means you don't have to worry so much about power outages, and it also fits with most outdoor power sources. Now the upgrade I really love though is the new interface on the Mark III battery. On the Mark II, you have your standard interface. You have your power button here. You have two USB-A's, a USB-C, and a 12 volt that I've never used before. It's also open. There's no kind of protection on it. That being said, I have had this outside in torrential rain and it's never been ruined. However, this being open, you know, that's exposed to water and dust and a whole bunch of stuff that can get in there. Well, on the Mark III, it's all covered now. It's all covered now, so you can have this outside and you'll know that it's protected. That's a really nice touch that they should have done from the very beginning. Now, over here you have your power button, and then you have one USB-C and one USB-A. So you do get a little bit less ports. Where you had 3 here, you only have 2 here. But the new upgrade is this right here. This is a 12 volt that you can DIY, right? So if you want to make a connection here, this is great for those of you that basically want to make your own kind of circuitry to charge stuff up. You can definitely use it. So the possibilities on this are endless. It might be able to power whatever it is that you need it to power. I don't know if it can power a fridge. I haven't tested that, but you can definitely make a plug that will go right in there. For all of you who love to DIY, it's a great thing for you to utilize. Now, as far as checking the capacity and how much power you have left, on a Mark II, you have these 5 indicator lights right here that light up blue, and then as you obviously use the battery, then that goes down. The Mark III, you actually have like a whole display now. You have this battery icon here that will light up, and it basically dwindles down as you use the battery. Now on the back, major upgrade on that as well. I've already told you how much I hate this dongle. Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore with the new battery because it's pretty much built in. And then if you want to charge this thing back up, then you just use the same block that you use to run your AC. You plug that into there. As far as handles, on a Mark II, you have one handle here, but it's built in. I love built-in handles because you don't have to worry about them breaking. It's part of the whole thing, and you just have to carry it there. Mark III has 2 handles, but they're this kind. There is some weight to this thing, and so I hope when I'm carrying this, I don't want this thing snapping off on both sides. I hope that this thing has been made to be rigid and that it's not gonna fall apart, because you know that with this one, yeah, that ain't going nowhere. Like, that's your handle. So let's compare specs. First off, BTUs, that's an important thing. It basically kind of measures how much coolness is coming out of these things. Now, if we're measuring how much coolness comes out of something, then I must be at like 1 million BTUs. Now, the Mark II produces about 2,300 BTUs, whereas the Mark III way more than doubles that at 5,280. So you're getting a lot more power with the Mark III. Now, if these things are plugged into constant power, like a campsite where you actually have outlets, then Mark III all day. That being said, though, if you're not plugged into an outlet like that and you're running off the batteries, then I'm wondering if that higher BTUs is gonna drain the battery faster. On the Mark II, you can run it up to about 6 hours. That's the longest I've gotten it on one battery, and that was at like a medium setting. It wasn't on rocket mode or anything like that, and I got about 6 hours. And they're saying that on the Mark III, you're also gonna get about 6 hours off of the battery. So if I'm assuming correctly, then they must have increased the capacity of the battery to account for the higher BTUs, but still give you the same exact kind of runtime. Now, as far as coverage, the Mark II covers about 40 square feet, which is more than enough for our rooftop tent. But the Mark III, they say this can cover from 160 to 250 square feet. That's a pretty big area, and it's gonna be overkill for a tent, but I'm hoping that it can do that so that I can get the tent even cooler or maybe even hotter when I want to use the heat function on this thing. So let's compare modes. On the Mark II, you have 4 basic ones. You have your fan mode, which if you want to run this like a fan and not the AC and conserve battery, you can put it on fan and it'll help run the battery even longer. Then you have rocket mode, which makes this kind of go at full speed in the very beginning to cool the place down. Then you have your standard AC mode, and then you have your sleep mode, which allows this thing to shut down after a specific amount of time. Now with the Mark III, you'll also still get those same modes. You have your rocket mode, you have your cool or AC mode, fan mode, and sleep mode, but you now get 3 additional modes that I think is awesome. First off, care mode, and this is what took me a little bit to understand. So what care mode is you would set a temperature on this thing, and once it reaches that temperature, it will basically wind down the power that's coming out of this and keep that power consistent so that it will preserve the battery even longer. Think of it like a vehicle. Off the line, you are hitting the gas and your vehicle is revving up and all that. But once you start to cruise, once you get to a comfortable speed, then your vehicle isn't working as hard. It's kind of like putting your vehicle in cruise control. That's what they should have called it. Cruise mode. Now here's a cool story behind, I didn't mean to say cool like it's a pun. Here's an inspirational story of why they created care mode to begin with. It was originally created for rescue and service animals, right? Like as we know, rescue and service animals are out there, they're working, and dogs in particular can't regulate their body temperatures the way humans can. Like when we get hot, we sweat it out. Well, dogs don't do that. They pant, they look for ways to cool down. So owners would bring an AC with them to keep their dogs cool. Well, if your AC is dying pretty quickly, then it becomes sorta useless. So with care mode, once the unit reaches the temperature that you set, it will stay at a constant power level to preserve the battery life and basically allow your pet to be comfortable longer. Now the next mode that I really like, because we live in Florida, and that's humidity control. With the humidity control mode, that will allow you to expel as much of the humidity that's inside the area where you might have this. Like summer camping sucks because it gets really humid here, and as you know, like overnight you wake up and the tent is just a lot of condensation. Well, this unit will now allow you to kind of cycle that air out, get the humidity out of there, bring in nice dry air, and keep you a lot more comfortable than sitting there with like a wet butt. And then finally, the last new mode that I really like, and I know a lot of you are also gonna like, heat mode. This thing can finally produce heat. Now, when we would go fall and winter camping, we would usually bring our electric heater, and then prior to that, we would bring the buddy heater, which I am no longer ever bringing again. I mean, it's propane and open flame inside a tent, and after some of the horror stories I've heard of that thing catching like sleeping bags on fire, I never know. Well, now I also don't have to bring the electric heater either, because this is now a year-round unit. I can use this summertime, fall, winter, spring. Like now, the Mark II, we would just bring that in the summertime, and then during winter and fall, it would just stay in the garage. Now I have one unit to control the climate inside my tent year-round. Now, as far as noise, some people have complained that the Mark II is a bit too loud. This one actually produces about 52 decibels, and they said that this new one is much quieter, and it comes in at 46 decibels. All right, so I have both of these units side by side because I wanna run some tests. Number one, I wanna test battery capacity. I'm not looking to see how long each of these batteries will last per se, just because that can vary. Depends on the temperature outside or how powerful you're running these units, at what level and what coolness. I'm looking more for whether or not these batteries will kind of die at the same time, right? Because the Mark III has higher BTUs than the Mark II, and theoretically that should kill this battery sooner unless they amped up the battery capacity on the Mark III. So that's why I want to run both of them at the same time and see if they kind of die at the same time. The second thing I want to test is the drainage. I've had issues with the Mark II kind of pooling and not draining completely, whereas the Mark III is supposed to have an active drain system. So I have the drains coming out of the back and I have it going to a bucket below. I also put a towel down just to protect my table just in case they leak. And then we're going to run that and see at the end if any of these are leaking any water. And then third, I want to test the temperature that's coming out of these vents. It's not going to be super scientific, this test, right? The ambient temperature in this garage is already 55 degrees. So these are not here to cool the room. All I really want to see is how comparable the temperature is that's coming out of these, or if the Mark III is actually producing cooler air. So let's jump into it. All right, so the units have been running for about an hour now, so we're gonna check to see the temperature that's coming out of each vent using my digital thermometer. Mark II, that's showing about 55 degrees, and then the Mark III, that's showing about 49.1 degrees. So that's 6 degrees colder on the Mark III with the exact same settings. So that's pretty impressive. So both batteries are dead after about 4.5 hours. The Mark II started to beep at me, so I knew that it was on its last leg, and then they both just kind of died, which is great news because that tells me that the Mark III, despite having more power, can last just as long as the Mark II, which tells me that they upgraded the battery. That was one of my bigger concerns, and now I know that I'm not losing any kind of runtime by switching to a unit that has higher power. One other really cool thing too is that the Mark III, there's a vent on the battery and I could still hear the fan going even with the unit turned off. That's an awesome thing because you want something that'll cool the battery down. The Mark II doesn't have anything like that. It doesn't have any vents, it doesn't have any fans. So something like a battery like this with higher power in it, having it be able to cool is a really good feature. Now, as far as temperature coming out of these things, as you saw earlier, the Mark III was pumping out 6 degrees cooler than the Mark II, which is great. Now, I really want to see the drainage. So I've been noticing through this whole test, that bucket down there is pretty full. Like there's a lot of water there and it's coming from the Mark III. Let's take out the drain really quick. There is water coming out of there. The Mark II, I already know it's wet because I can see it. Yeah, see, this has a stream of water coming out of it. So yeah, it looks like they both still have somewhat of a drainage issue, but not as bad as the Mark II. That's the drainage. Worse on the Mark II, but it's still there on the Mark III. So let's recap. Is the Mark III better than the Mark II? Now, even if I'm sponsored by Zero Breeze, I really tried my best to not be biased here. I wanted to really test this thing out because I don't want to push a product just because it's newer when an older version of it is better. I mean, that's even how I feel about my cameras. A brand new camera can come out, but if I still enjoy using my older camera better, then I'm not going to upgrade. You too, Apple, for the 100th time in 100 days, stop notifying me about that computer update because I am going to decline it every time. But after all the testing and going through all the features, I can honestly say I would prefer the Mark III over the Mark II any day. Like I don't lose anything upgrading to the Mark III, but I'm also gaining a ton more stuff. For example, the battery. Before I was thinking in my head, I'll bring the Mark III on shorter trips because the battery won't last as long, and I'll bring the Mark II on the longer trips. Well, if they're both running around the same time, then I'll just rather bring the Mark III. And then the controls on this, I can control more than I could on the Mark II. You can set the temperature you want it to be at and the power that's coming out of it from the lowest all the way to the highest setting. Plus, you're getting a bunch of new modes that you didn't have on the Mark II. You have your care mode, which will help regulate the temperature going into the tent. You have humidity control, which will get that condensation out of the tent when it gets really muggy. And you also have heat mode, which is going to be clutch during fall and winter. And then the active drain system, I think that's a huge plus. I mean, yeah, there was still water coming out of this, but it wasn't just gushing out like the Mark II. I feel like the Mark II was still holding all that water in and it wasn't draining it at all. Whereas this, although some water came out, you could see below that the majority of the water from here had already escaped the unit. And then there's all the little things like the plug. It's just a standard plug that you push in. It's not one of those little things you got to push in and turn the little knob and hope that your fingers don't cramp up. And on top of that, the plug is actually built into the battery, which means I don't have to bring that damn dongle anymore. And I can't even tell you how many times I've either forgotten it at home or lost one of them. And before you know it, I can't run my AC. So thank God for that.